The dying star of Ethelgard hung in the void like a swollen, bruised fruit, casting a sickly violet light over the sprawling megacity that curved upward into the sky. This was the ring world, a miracle of engineering and arrogance that encircled the failing sun. A continuous ribbon of silver and glass where gravity was a product of spin and air was a luxury of filtration. From the obsidian observation decks of the High Council spire, one could look up and see the glitter of the opposing districts across the diameter of the ring. 1,000 miles of vertical cityscapes twinkling like diamonds in a steel band. It was a world of terrifying verticality. The upper tiers, where the air smelled of ozone and crushed lilies, belonged to the ruling caste. Here, the architecture was all sweeping curves and bioluminescent crystal, buildings that hummed with psychic resonance. Below them lay the mid-levels, a dense tangle of commerce and transit, where sky trains shot through holographic advertisements like silver needles. And far below, hidden beneath the cloud layer of industrial smog, were the underlevels, the roots of the world, where the machinery groaned and the poor scavenged for water credits. Stability. That was the watchword etched into every archway and whispered in every telepathic broadcast. The High Council, a conclave of ancient robe-clad alien elders, maintained a grip on the population that was as suffocating as it was elegant. They preached the purity of thought. They spoke of the great harmony. They claimed that the only way to survive the dying star was to move as one mind, one will, without the friction of dissent or the chaos of unchecked memory. Leora stood on the balcony of the grand atrium, her hands resting on the cool, vibrating railing. She was a vision of this enforced perfection. Her skin was the color of pale moonlight, translucent enough to show the faint rhythmic pulsing of her bioluminescent veins, which glowed with a soft azure light in time with her heartbeat. She wore a gown of woven fiber optics that shifted color with her mood, currently a calm, diplomatic pearl white, to the hundreds of dignitaries mingling in the hall behind her. Leora was merely the daughter of High Diplomat Kalen. She was decorative. She was a symbol of grace. She was expected to smile, to radiate soothing emotional waves, and to marry well to secure a trade alliance. But beneath the surface, Leora felt a constant itching static. Her empathic sensitivity, a trait highly prized among her species, was sharper than most. She could feel the emotions of the room like a physical weight. She felt the greed radiating from the trade ministers, the cold ambition of the military prefects, and the bored exhaustion of the servants gliding through the crowd with trays of spiced nectar. A server, a young male with trembling hands, passed by her. He stumbled slightly, a droplet of nectar sloshing onto his sleeve. He radiated a spike of pure terror, anticipating punishment. Leora reached out, her fingers barely brushing his arm. "It is all right," she projected, her mental voice a soft chime. No one saw. "Go to the side passage and clean it. Breathe." The servant looked up at her, eyes wide with shock that a high-born would acknowledge him, let alone comfort him. He bowed low and scurried away, his terror replaced by a warm, confused gratitude. Leora turned back to the view, the pearl white of her dress flickering briefly with a darker shade of melancholy. Why was the price of stability always fear? She had asked her father that once. He had told her that fear was simply respect with its eyes wide open. She did not believe him. Inside the hall, the air was thick with perfume and the hum of polite conversation. Leora drifted through the crowd, careful to keep her mental shields high. She needed a moment of silence, a break from the cacophony of shallow desires. She slipped into a service alcove, a narrow corridor used by the tech crews to access the environmental systems. It was cooler here, and quiet. Or it should have been. A pair of legs protruded from an open access panel in the wall. They were clad in heavy, oil-stained gray trousers and thick magnetic boots that had seen better years. Leora paused, tilting her head. The legs kicked, and a voice echoed from inside the wall. "Just give me the hydro spanner, you rusted piece of junk," the voice muttered. It was a deep, gravelly voice, speaking the trade tongue with a heavy, distinct accent. It was a human voice. Leora had seen humans before, of course. They were a scavenger species, refugees from a distant war who had traded their technical skills for a corner of the Ringworld's slums. They were considered crude, loud, and mentally deaf, possessing zero telepathic ability. The mechanic slid out from the panel on a hover sled, wiping grease from his face with a rag that was dirtier than his skin. He stopped when he saw her. He was a man of sharp angles and rough textures. His hair was cut short. Military style, but grown out enough to be messy. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow, interrupting the line of it, and his eyes were a startlingly flat brown, devoid of any bioluminescence. He blinked at her, then looked down at his grimy hands, then back at her shimmering gown. "Well," he said, sitting up and resting his elbows on his knees. "I clearly took a wrong turn, unless the gala has moved into the ventilation ducts. I was seeking quiet," Leora said aloud. Her vocal cords felt strange. She rarely used spoken language with her own kind, but humans required sound. "Quiet is expensive on the Ringworld," the human said. He stood up, wiping his hands on his pants. He was taller than her, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested strength used for labor, not sport. "I am Ethan, Tech Class 3, and you are standing in a puddle of coolant." Leora looked down. Her hem was indeed hovering dangerously close to a blue, viscous puddle. She stepped back quickly. "Thank you." "Ethan," she said. "I am Leora." "I know," Ethan said, hard to miss the glowing nobility. He gestured vaguely at the wall. "Just fixing the atmospheric scrubbers. The council likes its air pure. Irony is, the filter was clogged with glitter from the party favors." Leora smiled, a genuine expression that made her facial markings flare brighter. "You find our celebrations wasteful." "I find them loud," Ethan corrected. He picked up a heavy wrench, but it pays the rent, or at least, it pays half the rent. He turned back to the panel, but Leora did not leave. There was something refreshing about his mental silence. Standing near him was like standing in a cool shadow after hours in the glaring sun. He projected nothing, no ambition, no lust, no deception, just a wall of quiet biological function. "You were a soldier," Leora stated. It was not a question. She had read the histories, the way he stood, the vigilance in his posture. It spoke of violence survived. Ethan stiffened slightly, his back to her. "A long time ago. Your Grace, different stars, different wars. Now I fight dust bunnies and clogged filters. It is a peaceful life." "Is it?" Leora asked. He looked over his shoulder, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Mostly, until a high-born lady corners me in a hallway and interrogates me about my resume." Leora stepped closer, intrigued by his deflection. "I do not mean to interrogate. I am simply curious. My father says humans are complicated." "Your father is being polite," Ethan said. "We are a mess. But we are good at fixing things you folks are too high-minded to touch." He reached into his tool belt and pulled out a small, metallic, distinct device, tapping it against his palm. "Look, I have got to get this coupling back in before the main AC unit realizes it is missing. If the temperature in the ballroom goes up by 1 degree, I will be in hot water. Leora frowned, tilting her head. Why would you be in heated liquid? Is that a punishment protocol? Ethan stared at her for a second, and then a laugh barked out of him, a rough, dry sound that seemed to surprise them both. No, he said, shaking his head, his eyes crinkling at the corners. It is an idiom. It means I will be in trouble. No boiling water involved, just a pay doc and a shouting supervisor. Ah, Leora said, feeling a flush of purple embarrassment color her cheeks. I see. Language is imprecise. It keeps things interesting, Ethan said. He looked at her, really looked at her, not as a superior but as a person. His gaze lingered on her eyes, and for a second, the gap between their species, the centuries of evolution, the social strata, the biological incompatibility, seemed to vanish. Leora felt a strange flutter in her chest, a physical sensation that had no telepathic origin. It was a spark, a raw chemical reaction. You should go back, Ethan said, his voice dropping an octave, losing its sarcastic edge. People will talk if you are seen consorting with the maintenance staff, especially the humankind. Let them talk, Leora said, surprising herself with her own defiance. Their thoughts are loud enough as it is. Before Ethan could respond, a chime echoed through the hallway. A drone floated around the corner, its scanner sweeping over them. Lady Leora, a synthetic voice intoned. Counselor Vane requests your presence immediately. Private demonstration chamber 4. Leora stiffened. The playful atmosphere evaporated instantly. A summons from Vane was not social. It was political. I must go, she said, stepping back, the mask of the diplomat sliding back into place. Ethan nodded, stepping back into the shadows of the alcove. Don't break a leg, he said. Leora paused, looking back at him with wide, horrified eyes. Why would you wish injury upon me? Ethan grinned, and it transformed his scarred face. It means good luck. Leora, go! She hurried away, the sound of his cryptic well-wishing echoing in her ears. The private demonstration chamber was located in the spire's pinnacle, a room of absolute transparency. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of hyperglass, offering a terrifying, unobstructed view of the dying star and the curvature of the world below. Counselor Vane stood by a console, his tall, elongated frame draped in robes of midnight blue. He was an ancient creature, his psychic presence a cold, oily slick that made Leora's skin crawl. Leora, he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. You honor us. Your father speaks often of your unique sensitivities. We thought it time you understood the burden of our governance. Leora bowed, keeping her mental barriers tight. I am here to serve, Counselor. Vane gestured to the center of the room. A circular section of the floor was opaque, obscuring a pit below. We have developed a new protocol, a necessity, given the rising unrest in the outer sectors. Stability requires sacrifice. You understand this? Theoretically, Leora said carefully. Vane tapped the console. Let us move from theory to practice. Observe. The opaque floor cleared. Leora gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Below them, separated by layers of soundproof glass, was a detention bay. It was packed with people, perhaps 200 of them. They were Sylvan, her own kind, but they were dressed in the rags of the far-flung agricultural colonies. They were strapped into rows of metallic chairs, their heads encased in heavy, pulsing neural harnesses. They were screaming. She could not hear them with her ears, but the psychic dampeners were not perfect. The sheer force of their terror slammed into Leora's mind like a physical blow. She staggered, clutching the console for support. "What is this?" she whispered. "We call it the Erase Protocol," Vane said, his tone conversational. These colonists were infected with radical dissent. They questioned the water rationing. They questioned the council. To execute them would be wasteful. Labor is a resource. Leora watched in horror as the machines activated. A high-pitched violet light surged through the cables into the helmets. The bodies in the chairs arched in unison, their muscles locking in spasm. On a large holographic map floating in the air, Leora saw sectors of the ring world highlighted in red. Sector 7, Sector 9, Sector 12. The text scrolling beside them was clinical. Memory wipe in progress. Cultural reset. Personality overwrite. "You are wiping their minds," Leora said, her voice trembling. "You are stealing their lives." "We are removing the trauma of dissent," Vane corrected. "When they wake, they will be blank, happy, productive. They will remember how to work, how to eat, how to obey. But they will not remember their families. They will not remember their anger. They will be pure." Leora looked down at the pit. She saw a mother reaching out for a child in the next chair, her fingers straining against the straps just before the light took her eyes and they went vacant and dull. The connection between them, the love, the history, the shared life, was severed as brutally as a limb being hacked off. "This is not stability," Leora said, her empathic control shattering. "This is murder. It is worse than murder. You are hollowing them out." She turned to Vane, her bioluminescence flaring a violent, angry red. "You cannot do this. I will tell the assembly. I will tell my father." Vane did not look surprised. He looked disappointed. He stepped closer, his mind probing hers with invasive force. "We feared as much," he said. "Your empathy is a gift, Leora, but it is also a liability. You feel too much for the components, and not enough for the machine." He pressed a button on his desk. 2 guards in heavy armor materialized from the shadows of the doorway. "My father," Leora began, backing away. "Your father is a patriot," Vane said. "He understands that a single rotten gear can break the mechanism. You have seen what no one outside the council should see. We cannot allow you to leave with that burden." He nodded to the guards. "Take her to the adjustment wing. She requires editing." "No!" Leora screamed, lashing out with a telepathic blast that sent one guard stumbling. But the other grabbed her arm. A neural inhibitor collar was slapped onto her neck. Instantly, her mind went dark. Her connection to the world, to the feelings of others, was severed. She was blind, deaf, and mute in the way that mattered most. She was dragged from the room, kicking and struggling, while Counselor Vane watched the erasure below with calm, dead eyes. The adjustment wing smelled of antiseptic and ozone. It was a cold, white hell of silent corridors and sealed doors. Leora was dragged through the maze, her heels skidding on the polished floor. She tried to fight, but the inhibitor collar made her limbs feel heavy, as if she were moving through water. They threw her into a room at the end of the hall. It was a small lab, dominated by a single ominous chair equipped with a neural harness identical to the ones she had seen in the pit. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying jagged waveforms of brain activity. "Prep the subject," the guard barked at the technician standing by the console. "Full reset. Priority Alpha." The technician turned around. It was Ethan. He froze. His face went pale, the blood draining away to leave the scar standing out in stark white relief. He looked from the guards to Leora, who was slumped on the floor, gasping for air. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The guard shoved Leora toward the chair. "Did you hear me? Human? Hook her up? Or do we need to find a tech who knows how to follow orders? Ethan's eyes darted to Leora. He saw the bruise forming on her arm. He saw the inhibitor collar. And he saw the terror, raw, absolute terror in eyes that had looked at him with kindness only an hour ago. He swallowed hard. Yes, yes, sir. I am on it. He moved toward her. His movements were mechanical, stiff. He helped Leora into the chair. His hands were shaking slightly. As he fastened the wrist restraints, he leaned in close. What did you do? He hissed under his breath, so low the guards could not hear. I saw, she choked out, the erase, the colonies. Ethan's jaw tightened. He worked the buckle, his knuckles white. I know. I have seen the logs. I thought I was just maintaining the hardware. I did not know they would use it on their own nobility. He looked up at the neural harness hanging above her head. It was a metal spider, waiting to descend. If you do this, Leora whispered, tears leaking from her eyes, glowing faintly silver. If you turn it on, I will be gone. Ethan looked at the console. He looked at the guards, who were standing by the door, bored, chatting about their shift rotation. They considered the human a non-threat, a piece of furniture. Please, Leora said, her voice breaking, please, do not let them erase me. Ethan looked into her eyes. He saw the depth of her consciousness, the complex, beautiful mind that had treated him like a man when everyone else saw a tool. He remembered the war. He remembered following orders that led to mass graves. He remembered promising himself years ago in the mud of a foreign world that he was done burying the innocent. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. He took a breath. When he opened them, the fear was gone. It was replaced by a cold, sharp focus. Hold still, he said loudly, for the guard's benefit, calibrating the neural spike. He moved to the main console. His fingers flew across the holographic interface. He was not initiating the sequence. He was bypassing the safety governors. He was routing the main power coupling directly into the lighting grid and the door locks. Hey, one guard shouted, noticing the screens flashing red. What are you doing? Ethan ignored him. He typed one final command. Overload. He slammed his fist onto the enter key. The room plunged into darkness as the overhead lights blew out in a shower of sparks. The monitors exploded, sending glass flying. Ethan spun around in the dark. He knew exactly where the chair was. He lunged, grabbing the heavy neural harness just as the emergency power kicked in, bathing the room in a rotating red strobe. The harness was engaging, clamping down. No! Ethan roared. He grabbed the thick power cables feeding the helmet. He braced his foot against the chair and pulled. He was human. He did not have telepathy. He did not have grace. But he had adrenaline, and he had the strength of a man who had carried wounded comrades through gravity wells. He screamed with effort. The cables sparked, burning his hands, but he did not let go. With a sickening screech of tearing metal, he ripped the cables clean out of the harness housing. Leora convulsed as the feedback shock hit her, crying out in pain. The guards were moving now, stumbling through the smoke, their stun batons crackling. Ethan grabbed Leora by the arm and hauled her out of the chair. She was limp, disoriented, her eyes rolling back. "Can you walk?" he shouted over the wail of the sirens that began to scream through the complex. Leora stumbled, falling against him. He caught her, wrapping an arm around her waist to hold her upright. She looked at him, dazed, blinking. Ethan. She slurred. He looked at the door. The electronic lock had shorted out, but the guards were almost on them. He pulled a heavy wrench from his belt and hurled it at the first guard, catching him in the visor. The guard went down. Ethan kicked the door release, forcing it open manually. The corridor beyond was flashing red. Drones were deploying from the ceiling vents. He looked at Leora. Her gown was torn, her light dim, but she was there. She was still Leora. "We have to move," he said, his voice fierce. He grabbed her hand, his rough, grease-stained fingers interlocking with her delicate, glowing ones. "If you want to live, hold on to me and do not look back." He pulled her into the corridor, sprinting toward the service shafts, plunging them both into the darkness of the unknown, leaving the life she knew burning in the sparks behind them. The maintenance corridors of the High Council spire were not built for human lungs, nor were they designed for the sweeping gowns of alien nobility. They were narrow, suffocating tubes of gray metal that smelled of recycled air and burning lubricants. Ethan did not run. He moved with the low, predatory lope of a man who had spent half his life in war zones, hauling Leora behind him like she was a sack of contraband rather than a high-born lady of the court. Red emergency strobes pulsed against the walls, throwing their shadows into frantic, jerking relief. The wail of the alarms was a physical pressure, vibrating in the teeth. "Keep moving," Ethan grunted, yanking her around a sharp corner just as a security drone buzzed past the intersection behind them, its scanner sweeping the empty air with a beam of coherent blue light. Leora stumbled, her feet tangling in the shredded remains of her pearl-white dress. Her breath came in ragged, whistling gasps. The bioluminescent markings on her skin, usually a calm azure, were flickering violently between panicked violet and a sickly dim gray. She was in shock, her mind reeling not just from the physical exertion, but from the psychic blunt force trauma of the interrupted erase procedure. "I cannot," she gasped, leaning against a steaming pipe, heedless of the heat. "My legs, they do not obey." Ethan stopped, spinning around. He grabbed her shoulders, his grip hard enough to bruise. He looked at the tears streaming down her face, glowing faintly in the dark. "Your legs work fine," he said, his voice rough. "It is your head that is the problem. Listen to me. If we stop, they will peel your mind apart like a ripe fruit. Is that what you want?" Leora shook her head frantically. "No. Then pick up your feet. Your Grace." He dragged her forward again, kicking open a hatch that led to a gravity service shaft. The drop was a black throat plunging down into the bowels of the city. "We have to jump," Ethan said, looking down. Leora recoiled. "That is a waste disposal chute. It is an exit," Ethan corrected. "And honestly, considering how this night is going, it fits the theme." He grabbed a rusted handle on the wall, wrapped his other arm around her waist and stepped into the void. The gravity dampeners caught them with a sickening lurch, slowing their fall from lethal to merely nauseating. They plummeted past blurred levels of the spire, flashes of clean white laboratories, administrative offices and secure archives, descending toward the dirty roots of the world. To keep her from screaming, or perhaps to keep himself from thinking about the treason he had just committed, Ethan started talking. "You know," he shouted over the rush of wind, "I have had some terrible first dates in my time. There was a girl on the colony of Vestara who tried to stab me for ordering the wrong wine. But this takes the prize. Leora buried her face in his shoulder, her fingers digging into the tough fabric of his technician's jumpsuit. "You consider this a courtship ritual? Kidnapping, alarms, plummeting to our doom?" Ethan laughed, a jagged sound. "It is certainly memorable. Most guys just bring flowers. I thought I would show you the ventilation infrastructure. It is very romantic if you like rust." They hit the bottom of the shaft, the dampeners failing to arrest the last 5 feet of their fall. They landed hard on a pile of semi-solid insulation foam. Ethan groaned, rolling onto his back, but he kept his grip on Leora, ensuring she landed on top of him rather than the metal grating beneath. "Are you broken?" he asked breathlessly. Leora pushed herself up, her hands resting on his chest. She looked down at him. His face was smeared with grease and sweat, the scar on his eyebrow stark under the flickering service lights. "I am intact," she said, her voice trembling. "You are a lunatic, Ethan. Occupational hazard," he wheezed, shoving her off gently so he could stand. "Come on. We are not safe yet." They emerged from the spire's foundations into a loading bay that smelled of ozone and rotting synthetic protein. A massive automated cargo lifter, suspended on magnetic rails, was idling nearby, its robotic loader arm stacking crates of unauthorized imports. Ethan sprinted toward it, ignoring the warning holograms that flashed authorized personnel only. He jammed a bypass chip into the ignition console. The machine shuddered to life, its anti-grav generators whining in protest. "Get in!" he shouted. Leora scrambled into the passenger cage, a rusted metal basket swaying precariously over the edge of the platform. Ethan vaulted into the pilot's seat and slammed the throttle forward. The lifter surged away from the spire, diving over the edge of the upper tier's retaining wall and plunging into the smog clouds of the under levels. The transition was violent. One moment, they were surrounded by the clean, silent architecture of the elite. The next, they were swallowed by a chaotic ocean of neon noise and filth. The underlevels were a sprawling vertical slum built into the structural supports of the ring world. Here, the sun was just a rumor. The light came from millions of holographic advertisements selling cheap neural mods, synthetic gin, and illegal memory stims. Sky trains rattled on rusted tracks, shaking the air. Floating bazaars drifted like jellyfish through the smog, tethered by chains to the massive pillars of the city. Leora gripped the railing of the lifter, her eyes wide. She had seen maps of this place, sterile schematics in the council chambers. But she had never breathed its air. It tasted of copper and desperation. But the sensory assault of the city was nothing compared to the war inside her head. As the adrenaline faded, the damage from the neural harness began to manifest. The erase protocol had been interrupted, but not before it had clawed at the edges of her memory. Leora squeezed her eyes shut, but the darkness was worse. Flashes. She was not in the cargo lifter. She was in a burning village. The sky was the color of a bruise. Screams, not with her ears, but inside her skull. 1,000 voices crying out in unison, silenced by a wave of white static. "Look at me," a woman's voice whispered, clear as a bell. "Do not let me go." Leora gasped, clutching her head. The neon lights of the passing buildings smeared into terrifying shapes, monstrous faces with hollow eyes, weeping black oil. The vibrations of the lifter's engine felt like hands grabbing at her ankles, pulling her down into the pit she had seen in the council chamber. "Ethan!" she cried out, the name tearing from her throat. Ethan glanced back, his face grim. He saw her rocking back and forth, her bioluminescence flashing in chaotic, jagged patterns of distress. "Hold on, Leora," he called out, banking the lifter hard around a floating noodle shop to avoid a police drone. "We are almost there. Just focus on my voice. The rest isn't real." "It feels real," she sobbed. "They are in my head. The erased. I can feel them dying." He reached back, his hand finding hers on the railing. His skin was rough, calloused, and warm. It was an anchor. "Then feel this," he commanded. "I am here. I am real. The ghosts can wait." He dove the lifter into a narrow alleyway between two massive cooling towers, landing it with a teeth-rattling thud on a rusted landing pad hidden beneath a canopy of swaying electric cables. "Come on," he said, helping her out. "I know a guy. He is ugly. He smells like battery acid, but he knows brains." Ethan led her through a labyrinth of damp tunnels, shielding her face from the prying eyes of the street vendors and scavengers. They arrived at a heavy blast door covered in graffiti. Ethan hammered a rhythmic code on the metal. A slot slid open. A single mechanical eye swiveled out, focusing on Ethan, then on the glowing alien woman shivering beside him. "You bring heat." "Ethan," a synthesized voice buzzed. "Council drones are swarming the upper grid. I bring cash. Jax," Ethan shot back. "And a problem only you can fix. Open up." The door groaned open. The interior of the shop was a nightmare of wires and wetware. Disembodied cybernetic limbs hung from the ceiling like cured meats. Sitting in the center of the room, surrounded by banks of servers, was Jax. He was a Valerian, a species that resembled a collection of chitinous plates and spindly limbs. But Jax had modified himself so heavily it was hard to tell where the biology ended and the machine began. "Sit," Jax commanded, pointing a claw at a reclining dental chair stained with questionable fluids. Ethan guided Leora to the chair. She sat, trembling, her hands gripping the armrests. She was subjected to a partial erase protocol, Ethan explained, his voice tight. "I pulled the plug, but she is leaking. Hallucinations, sensory feedback." Jax chittered, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. He extended a telescopic probe from his wrist, positioning it millimeters from Leora's forehead. A fan of red laser light scanned her skull. Leora flinched, seeing the laser as a burning blade, but Ethan's hand on her shoulder kept her grounded. "Interesting," Jax buzzed. "Very messy. The council usually prefers clean cuts. This is a hatchet job. Can you fix her?" Ethan asked. "Fix? No. Stabilize? Maybe." Jax tapped a keyboard with 3 hands simultaneously. "But there is something else. A trap." "A trap," Leora whispered. "Deep in the limbic cortex," Jax said. "A hypnotic suggestion implanted during the initial sequence. It is a kill switch. If you attempt to verbalize the specific visual data you accessed, the map of the erased sectors, the faces of the victims, your autonomic nervous system will shut down. Your heart will stop." Leora stared at him in horror. They booby-trapped my own mind?" "To ensure silence," Jax said. "You can think about it, you can remember it, but if you try to speak the truth of it to the masses, you die." Ethan slammed his hand against a server rack. "Can you remove it?" Jax retracted his probe, not without turning her brain into soup. "It is woven into the brainstem. You are walking a tightrope. Girl, you carry the evidence, but the lock is rigged to blow." A chime from a wall monitor drew their attention. It was a news feed, projected onto a dirty sheet of plastic. The image on the screen was Ethan's official ID photo, a younger, cleaner version of him in his military dress uniform. The headline scrolled in bold, angry red glyphs. "Terrorist identified. Citizen Ethan Thorne." The news anchor's voice was smooth and grave. "Wanted for the violent abduction of Lady Leora of House Vane. Evidence suggests Thorne is a radical associated with human separatist groups. He is considered armed and mentally unstable. A reward of 500,000 credits is offered for information leading to his capture." "They spun the narrative," Ethan muttered, watching his face rotate on the screen. "I kidnap you. I am the villain. You die. It is a tragedy caused by a human brute. They stay clean. They erased your history too," Leora said softly. "They made you a monster." "I have been called worse," Ethan said, turning away from the screen. "Jax, we need a place to lay low. Somewhere the scanners cannot penetrate." Jax hesitated, his mechanical eye whirring. "My basement is shielded. above the Black Lotus bar. It is loud, it is dirty, but it is off the grid. It will cost you everything you have in your pockets. Ethan emptied his credits, a handful of rare components, and his multi-tool onto the table. Done. The safe house was exactly as promised, cramped, vibrating with the bass of the music from the bar below, and safe. It was a single room with a mattress on the floor, a cracked sink, and a single window painted over with black paint to block out the neon glare. Ethan locked the heavy steel door and slid the bolt home. The sound of the lock clicking was the first moment of true silence they had experienced in hours. He turned to look at Leora. She was sitting on the edge of the mattress, looking utterly out of place in her ruined finery. The high collar of her gown had been torn away, revealing the angry, blistering burns on her neck where the neural harness had clamped down. "Let me see that," Ethan said quietly. He went to the sink and soaked a clean rag in cold water. He found a tin of nanite healing salve in the cabinet, standard issue for the underlevels where doctors were scarce. He knelt in front of her. Leora flinched as he reached out. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "I am not going to hurt you." He gently dabbed the cool cloth against the burns. Leora hissed, her hands gripping her knees. Her skin was incredibly soft, warm to the touch, and the bioluminescence beneath it swirled with a chaotic mix of pain orange and soothing blue as the cold water hit the wound. "I am sorry," Ethan said, applying the salve. "I had to rip the cables. There was no time to disengage the locks." "You saved my life," Leora whispered. "Do not apologize for the method." She looked at him then, really looked at him. They were inches apart. The room was dim, lit only by the faint glow of her skin and the streetlights leaking through the scratches in the black paint on the window. She raised a hand, her long, slender fingers hovering over the scar on his eyebrow. "May I?" she asked. Ethan froze. He was not used to being touched with anything other than aggression or indifference. "Go ahead." Her fingertips brushed the scar tissue. Even without her full empathic senses, which were currently bruised and reeling, the contact sparked a connection. She felt a flash of mud, cold, clinging mud, the smell of burning plastosteel, a deep, hollow sense of loss that felt like a cavity in the chest. "This is old pain," she murmured, her eyes searching his. "You carry so much weight." Ethan pulled back slightly, his defense mechanisms rising. "It is just a scar. Leora, everyone down here has them." "Not like this," she said. "You hide it with jokes. You hide it with sarcasm. But inside, you are screaming just as loud as the people in that chamber." Ethan looked down, unable to meet her gaze. His hands were still on her neck, his thumbs resting near her pulse point. He could feel the rapid flutter of her heart. "I saw what they did to those colonies," he said, his voice raspy. "Years ago, I was part of a mop-up crew. They told us we were relocating refugees, but the people we loaded onto the transports, their eyes were empty. They didn't know their own names. I tried to report it. My commanding officer told me I was hallucinating from stress. They discharged me, erased my service record. I have been waiting 10 years for someone to prove I was not crazy." He looked up, and the raw vulnerability in his eyes took Leora's breath away. "And then you walked in," he whispered, "a council noble who actually gave a damn." Leora leaned in. The distance between them was charged, electric. It was forbidden, it was dangerous, it was impossible, and yet, the pull was undeniable. "I am terrified," she confessed, her voice barely a breath against his lips. "I do not know who I am anymore. My world is a lie. My father is a monster. If I close my eyes, I see them dying. I feel like I am dissolving." You are not dissolving, Ethan said fiercely. He moved one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. You are the most solid thing I have ever known. Leora trembled. She leaned into his touch, seeking the warmth, the roughness, the undeniable humanity of him. Her lips parted. She wanted to kiss him, to bridge the gap between their species and seal this pact of survival with something physical. Ethan leaned in, his eyes closing, the scent of ozone and lilies filling his head. Boom! The world exploded. The door to the safe house blew inward, twisting off its hinges and slamming into the opposite wall. The shockwave threw Ethan and Leora apart, sending them tumbling across the floor in a shower of plaster and dust. Flashbangs rolled into the room, detonating with blinding white light and deafening cracks. Ethan shook his head, ears ringing. He scrambled to his feet, instinct taking over. "Get up!" he roared, grabbing Leora and hauling her toward the back wall. Figures in black tactical armor swarmed through the doorway. They were not council guards. They moved too fast, too aggressively. Mercenaries. Hired killers who didn't care about capture protocols. "Target acquired!" a voice shouted through a vocoder. "Neutralize the human. Secure the package." Ethan kicked over the heavy metal table to create a makeshift barricade. Plasma rounds sizzled through the air, melting slag into the floor where they had been standing seconds ago. "The window!" Ethan shouted. He grabbed a heavy canister of compressed gas from the corner and hurled it at the painted glass. It shattered, revealing a rusted fire escape clinging to the side of the building. He shoved Leora through the opening. "Go!" She scrambled out onto the metal grate, the wind whipping her hair. Ethan followed, pausing only to toss a small, puck-sized device back into the room. "Fire in the hole," he muttered. He dove out the window just as the EMP grenade detonated, inside the room. The mercenaries' tactical visors and plasma rifles shorted out in a burst of sparks. Shouts of confusion erupted. Ethan grabbed Leora's hand and pulled her down the rattling stairs. "They are blind for 10 seconds. Move!" They sprinted down the fire escape, jumping the last flight to the alleyway below. But the alley wasn't empty. 2 more mercenaries were waiting at the bottom, their weapons raised. Leora stopped, gripping Ethan's arm. "Wait!" she gasped. Her eyes flared white. "What?" Ethan leveled his pistol, but he was outgunned. "Left," she said, her voice echoing with a strange harmonic distortion. "The one on the left is hesitant. His neural implant is glitching. He is in pain." Ethan didn't question her. He didn't ask how she knew. He swung his aim to the right, firing 2 rapid shots that took the second mercenary in the knee and shoulder. The mercenary on the left flinched, distracted by the sudden migraine Leora had sensed, or perhaps pushed into his mind. In that split second of hesitation, Ethan closed the distance, slamming the butt of his pistol into the man's helmet, knocking him cold. "Nice trick," Ethan panted, grabbing her again. "Survival," Leora said, her chest heaving. They ran until their lungs burned, weaving through the crowded markets, ducking under laundry lines, and sliding through gaps in the decaying infrastructure. They didn't stop until they reached a decommissioned water filtration plant, hiding in the shadows of massive rusted pipes. Ethan slumped against the cold metal, checking the charge on his pistol. "We have 3 shots left, and half the bounty hunters in the sector are looking for a payout." Leora slid down the wall next to him, pulling her knees to her chest. She looked at her ruined dress, now stained with grease, blood, and sewer water. She let out a short, hysterical giggle. "What?" Ethan asked, looking at her with concern. "I was wearing this for the gala," she said, gesturing to the rags. "The fashion critics said pearl white was too safe. I wonder what they would say about industrial grime and mercenary blood." Ethan snorted, a genuine smile breaking through his exhaustion. It is a bold look, very avant-garde. I think I prefer it, she said, her smile fading into a look of fierce determination. The pearl white stained too easily. This hides the dirt. Ethan looked at her with a new level of respect. She wasn't just a diplomat anymore. She was a survivor. A subtle vibration buzzed in Ethan's pocket. He stiffened, pulling out a battered communication drive he had salvaged years ago. It was blinking with an encrypted code. "What is it?" Leora asked. "Someone is pinging my old military frequency," Ethan said, frowning. "That is impossible. That encryption key has been dead for a decade." He pressed the receive button. Text scrolled across the tiny screen, green against the black. "We saw the broadcast. We know what you took from the lab. The erase protocol must be exposed. Bring the girl to the asteroid sanctuary at Sector 0. We can offer shelter, but only if she remembers." Ethan looked up at Leora. "Who is it?" she asked. "The Resistance," Ethan said, "or a trap?" Leora closed her eyes, reaching out with her senses. She felt the echo of the message, the intent behind the digital signal. "It feels desperate," she said, "like hope with sharp edges." Ethan stood up, offering her his hand. "Hope with sharp edges is the only kind we have got left," he said. Leora took his hand. "Then let us go," she said, "before I forget why we are running." The journey to the Resistance base was a pilgrimage through the graveyard of the Ringworld's industrial past. To escape the Council's tracking grid, Ethan and Leora were forced to navigate the dead zones, a belt of abandoned solar farms and gravity-glitched transit tunnels that lay between the bustling mid-levels and the cold void of space. Ethan piloted a stolen magnetic skiff, a flat, hovering platform barely large enough for the two of them. He stood at the tiller, his eyes narrowed against the flickering light of distant plasma storms. Leora sat near the edge, her knees drawn to her chest, watching the wreckage of civilization float by. They passed through a sector where the artificial gravity generators had failed decades ago. Massive solar collectors, shaped like wilting metal flowers, drifted weightlessly in the gloom. Clouds of frozen coolant crystals glittered like diamonds in the skiff's headlights. "Hold on," Ethan warned, his voice rough over the wind, gravity sheer ahead. The skiff shuddered violently as it crossed the invisible boundary between zero gravity and the Ringworld's spin-generated pull. Leora gasped, feeling her stomach lurch into her throat before slamming back down. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. "You do this often?" she shouted over the groan of the engines. "Only when I am being hunted by the entire government," Ethan shouted back. He looked down at her, a smirk playing on his lips. "You are doing well, Your Grace. Most highborns would have vomited by now." "I am holding it in out of spite," Leora retorted, though a faint smile touched her lips. They banked hard around a floating debris field, the shattered hull of an ancient star freighter, and saw it, hidden inside the hollowed-out shell of a massive, captured asteroid that had been tethered to the ring's superstructure, was the sanctuary. It was an ugly lumpen rock, pitted with craters. But as they approached, a hangar bay door ground open, revealing a warm, amber light within. Ethan guided the skiff into the landing bay. The air inside smelled of recycled oxygen, unwashed bodies, and high-yield explosives. As the skiff touched down, they were not greeted with cheers. A dozen weapons were leveled at them instantly. The Resistance fighters were a motley collection of the Ringworld's cast-offs. There were humans in patched flight suits, reptilian heavy worlders with scarred scales, and spindly multi-limbed mechanics clutching plasma wrenches like clubs. "Get off the deck," a voice boomed, A massive figure stepped forward. He was a Krell, a species known for their rock-like hide and immense strength. One of his 4 eyes was covered by a metal patch, and he held a heavy rotary cannon with casual ease. Ethan raised his hands, stepping off the skiff. "Good to see you too. Vorian, I see you have redecorated." Vorian ignored the pleasantry. He pointed a thick finger at Leora, who was standing slowly, her bioluminescent markings glowing softly in the dim light. "Why did you bring a glow skin here, Thorn?" Vorian growled. "That is a Vane family crest on her neck." "She is the enemy?" "She is the mission," Ethan said, stepping in front of her. "She is the one who triggered the alarms in the spire." She saw the erase protocol. A ripple of angry murmurs went through the crowd. A human woman with a cybernetic arm spat on the deck. "They see everything," the woman said, "and then they forget it when it becomes inconvenient. Why should we trust her?" Her father signed the order that wiped Sector 9. Leora flinched. She felt the waves of hatred crashing against her empathic shields, hot, jagged, and justified. She stepped out from behind Ethan, standing tall despite her fear. "I cannot change my blood," Leora said, her voice trembling but clear. "But I can change my allegiance. I saw what they did. I carry the proof in my head. Proof can be faked." Vorian spat. "The Council plays long games. How do we know you are not a walking tracking beacon?" "I will show you," Leora said. "Put me in the chair. Do a deep dive. If I am lying, you can space me." Ethan turned to her, eyes wide. "Leora, no. The trap Jax warned us about. If you trigger the specific memories, the kill switch might activate. It is the only way." "Ethan," she said, locking eyes with him. "They need to see." Vorian grunted, lowering his weapon slightly. "The chair it is. But if she twitches wrong, we shoot her." The Resistance's medical bay was a converted storage container, cluttered with stolen medical tech and jury-rigged scanners. Leora sat in the center, a halo of sensor nodes strapped to her skull. The output was wired to a large, cracked holographic screen on the wall. Ethan stood by the console, his hand hovering near the emergency cutoff. Vorian and the inner circle of the Resistance watched with arms crossed. "I am going to guide you," Ethan said softly. "Do not fight the current. Just let the images surface. If you feel the seizure starting, pull back." Leora nodded, closing her eyes. She focused on her breathing, lowering her mental walls. "Initiating scan," a medic announced. Static filled the screen, followed by jagged bursts of color. Then, the image sharpened. It was shaky, viewed through the filter of Leora's own terror, but it was unmistakable. The private demonstration chamber appeared on the screen. The view looked down into the pit. The Resistance fighters gasped as they saw the rows of victims, the pulsing violet light of the neural harnesses. Then came the sound, the psychic scream of the erased, translated by the scanner into a high-pitched audio distortion that made everyone in the room wince. "Focus on the data," Ethan commanded, watching Leora's vitals spike. "Leora, show them the map, on the screen." Leora's memory shifted. She focused on the holographic map floating in the council chamber, the red zones, Sector 7, Sector 12. And then, new data surfaced, information Leora had absorbed subconsciously during her brief connection to the council's network. It overlaid the map, resource allocation projection, a cold, mechanical voice narrated from the memory. Population density exceeds sustainable water reclamation limits by 40%. Solution: erase protocol. Remove dissenting cultures. Rewire for minimum resource consumption and maximum labor output. The room went deathly silent. "It is not just political," Vorian whispered, his single eye widening. "It is a cull. They are wiping out entire cultures just to save on water rations. On the screen, the image began to fracture. Leora's heart rate on the monitor climbed to dangerous levels, 180 beats per minute. The kill switch was activating. Ethan saw the warning lights flash red. "Pull her out," Ethan shouted. He slammed the disconnect switch. The screen went black. Leora arched in the chair, a single choked cry escaping her lips before she slumped forward, unconscious. Ethan was at her side in a second, catching her before she hit the floor. He checked her pulse. It was thready, but there. "She is alive," he breathed. He looked up at Vorian. The giant alien looked shaken. The hostility was gone, replaced by a grim, horrifying realization. She told the truth. Vorian rumbled. Leora woke hours later in a quiet observation dome at the top of the asteroid. The room was small, a bubble of reinforced glass looking out over the majestic, terrifying sweep of the ring world and the dying violet star in the center. She sat up on the cot, wrapping a rough wool blanket around her shoulders. Her head throbbed with a dull, persistent ache. She felt him before she saw him. Ethan was standing by the glass, his silhouette framed against the starlight. "You are awake," he said, not turning around. Leora swung her legs off the cot. "Did they see?" "They saw," Ethan said. "Vorian is mobilizing the cells. They are contacting the other sectors. You did it. Leora." Leora did not feel triumphant. She felt hollow. She walked to the glass, standing beside him. She looked down at the glittering curve of the upper tiers, thousands of miles away. Somewhere in that band of light was her home, her father. "My family," she whispered. "We have lived in luxury for generations, the finest silks, the purest water. I always thought we were blessed. Now I know we were just parasites feeding on the erased." Ethan turned to her. His face was solemn. "You did not know. Ignorance is not innocence," she said bitterly. "I benefited from it. Every time I drank a glass of water, I was drinking someone's stolen life." She turned to him, her eyes shining with tears. "The Resistance has a memory wiper, do they not? A crude one, but functional." Ethan frowned. "What are you asking?" "I want you to use it on me," Leora said. "After we give them the data, after this is over, I want you to wipe me." Ethan stiffened. "What? I cannot live with this." "Ethan," she cried, her composure cracking, "the faces in the pit, the knowledge that my bloodline is a plague. I want to forget. I want to be blank. I want peace." Ethan grabbed her shoulders, spinning her around to face him. His grip was hard, angry. "No," he said. "It is my mind," Leora argued. "It is my choice. It is a coward's choice," Ethan shouted, his voice echoing in the small dome. He took a breath, lowering his voice, but the intensity remained. "Look at me," he commanded. Leora looked up, trembling. "They tried to erase you once," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed emotion. "They tried to take everything that makes you you and turn you into a doll. If you let them do it again, if you do it to yourself, then they win. They win whether they are in the room or not, because they will have convinced you that the only way to survive is to stop being human, or Sylvan, or whatever the hell we are." Leora stared at him. The words hung in the air, echoing the deepest fear she had refused to acknowledge. "But it hurts," she whispered. "It hurts so much." "I know," Ethan said softer now. He took her hands, pressing them flat against his chest. Through his shirt, she could feel the heavy, rapid thud of his heart. "Feel that?" he asked. "That is fear. I am terrified every single day. I remember the war. I remember the friends I left in the mud. I remember the look on your face when I ripped those cables out. It hurts. He stepped closer, invading her space, his warmth radiating into the chill of the dome. "But that pain means I am real," he said. "It means I am still here. Do not ask me to help you disappear, Leora, because I am just getting used to you being here." Leora looked at his scars, the rough lines of his face, the fierce, protective light in his brown eyes. She realized then that he wasn't just guarding her life, he was guarding her soul. She felt a surge of emotion that had nothing to do with telepathy and everything to do with the man standing in front of her. It was gratitude, yes, but it was also a hunger, a desperate need to be held, to be anchored. "Ethan," she breathed. She leaned in, and the movement broke the last of his restraint. He pulled her to him, his hands tangling in her hair, and kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It tasted of adrenaline and grief. Leora clung to him, her arms wrapping around his neck, pulling him down. She poured everything she was feeling into the contact, her guilt, her terror, her awe of him. For a moment, the dying star and the war and the council ceased to exist. There was only the heat of his mouth, the scratch of his stubble against her skin, and the overwhelming grounding solidity of his body against hers. It was a boundary crossed, a law broken, human and highborn, scavenger and noble. They pulled apart slowly, breathless, their foreheads resting against each other. Leora's bioluminescence was flaring a brilliant, flushed rose gold. Ethan's hands were shaking as he cupped her face. "We cannot," he whispered, his voice rough. "Not here. Not like this." Leora nodded, her eyes closed, savoring the lingering warmth. "No, not yet. Not until we are free," Ethan promised. "Not until you can choose this because you want it. Not because you are afraid of the dark." Leora opened her eyes. "I do want it," she said firmly. "But you are right. First, we survive." The mood in the Resistance Command Center the next morning was electric. The distrust was gone, replaced by a frantic, focused energy. Leora stood at the central tactical table, her knowledge of the upper-tier protocols proving invaluable. "The central archive is here," Leora said, pointing to a holographic schematic of the council spire. "The data spine. It is air-gapped. We cannot hack it from the outside. We have to physically plug in the transmitter." Vorian leaned over the table. "The security there is tight. Biometric scanners every 10 feet, DNA sniffers, psychic residue detectors." Ethan, who was soldering a complex-looking circuit board nearby, looked up. "Leave the scanners to me," he said. "I am building a spoofer. It emits a false biosignal. To the sensors, we will just look like a pair of level 4 maintenance drones." "And the psychic detectors?" Vorian asked. "They will smell the lady's signature a mile away." Leora picked up a small silver disc. "I can mask my signature. It takes concentration, but I can mimic the static of a cleaning bot." Ethan grinned, tossing a wire stripper in his hand. "See? We are a perfect team. She brings the elegance, I bring the noise." Leora shot him a look that was half scolding, half affectionate. "You bring the chaos. Ethan, there is a distinction." The resistance fighters around the table chuckled. The tension that had defined their arrival had dissolved into a camaraderie born of necessity. Leora was no longer the enemy. She was the key. But the moment of levity was shattered by the shrill beep of the comms console. A comms officer, a young Rhodian with large, dark eyes, looked up, his face pale. "Priority alert from Sector 4, he said. Ethan froze. Sector 4. That was the primary human habitation zone, the slums where he had grown up. "What is it?" Ethan asked, his voice low. The officer put the feed on the main screen. It was a grainy transmission from a resistance lookout. Massive troop movements, the officer reported. The council is sealing off the sector. They are jamming the local comms. Power is being diverted to the substation grids. Leora stared at the readings. The power spikes. I recognize that signature. It is the charging cycle for the neural dampeners. Ethan slammed his fist onto the table. They are starting a new erase cycle. Target? Vorian asked. The entire sector, Leora said, her voice horrified. It is not a surgical strike. It is a mass wipe. Tens of thousands of people. Ethan's face went white. My brother is in Sector 4. My old unit. He looked at Vorian, then at Leora. The plan changes. We cannot just broadcast the old logs. If we do not stop this, everyone in that sector will be gone by sunrise. Vorian shook his head. We are not ready. Thorn, we need days to prep the assault. We do not have days. Ethan shouted. We have hours. Leora stepped forward, placing her hand on Ethan's arm to steady him. We do both, she said. Her voice was calm, possessed of a sudden, icy clarity. We infiltrate the archive, just as we planned, she said, addressing the room. But we do not just broadcast the logs. We use the archive's central command override to shut down the grid in Sector 4. Vorian crossed his massive arms. That is suicide. The moment you touch the command override, the AI overseer will lock the room down and vent the atmosphere. You will be trapped. Then we have to be fast, Ethan said, his eyes burning. We get in, we upload the truth, we kill the power, and we run like hell. He looked at Leora. It is a one-way ticket if we mess this up. Leora looked at the map, then at Ethan. She saw the fear in him, not for himself, but for the people he called kin. Then we had better not mess it up, she said. Vorian looked between them for a long moment. Then, he slammed a fresh magazine into his rotary cannon. All right, the giant alien growled. We will cause a diversion at the base of the spire. Draw the security forces down. You two go up the maintenance shafts. Get to the archive. Save the humans. Ethan nodded. He grabbed his gear bag and slung it over his shoulder. He looked at Leora. Ready for a second date? He asked, a ghost of his usual smirk returning. Leora adjusted her improvised tactical vest over her ruined gown. Try not to get me killed. Ethan, she said, I am starting to like this revolution. Ethan checked the charge on his pistol. Let's go start a fire. They moved toward the hangar bay, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. It was no longer just about exposing a crime. It was about saving a city. And as they boarded the skiff, shoulder to shoulder, they both knew that they were flying directly into the heart of the dying star's madness, with nothing but each other to hold on to. The elevator to the upper tiers did not hum. It sang. It was a harmonic frequency designed to soothe the nervous systems of the highborn, a subtle vibration that whispered of safety and superiority. Ethan Thorne stood in the back of the service car, scratching at the collar of his gray maintenance jumpsuit. It was a size too small, tight across the shoulders, and smelled of industrial solvent. Beside him, Leora stood with a spine as rigid as a rod of Imperium steel. She wore an identical jumpsuit, her luminous markings dimmed to a faint sullen gray through sheer force of will. She held a heavy diagnostic tablet, her fingers gripping the casing hard enough to whiten the knuckles. Relax, Ethan murmured, his voice barely audible over the harmonic singing of the lift. You look like you are about to execute someone. We are just here to fix a sub-relay. I am relaxing, Leora hissed back, keeping her eyes on the floor indicators. This is my relaxed face. It is terrifying, Ethan said. The doors slid open with a soft chime. They stepped out into the grand concourse of Tier 1. It was a world made of light. The walls were translucent alabaster, lit from within by a soft gold pulse that mimicked the heartbeat of a sleeping god. The air was scented with crushed celestial lilies and ozone. Everywhere, holographic statues of the High Counselors loomed, their faces benevolent and stern, rotating slowly above the heads of the walking elite. A massive banner of shimmering photon weave hung across the archway ahead, displaying the slogan, "Unity through harmony. Memory is chaos. Silence is peace." Ethan adjusted the tool belt at his hip, feeling the weight of the unauthorized decoding spikes and the plasma pistol concealed beneath a pile of wrenches. He tapped the small comms bead in his ear. "Check your 6. Leora," he whispered, though he was walking right beside her. "Security drone at 4 o'clock. Do not look at it." Leora kept walking, her gaze fixed on the distance. "I see it. It is a Class 5 monitor. It scans for pulse irregularities." "Then think boring thoughts," Ethan advised. "Think about drying paint, or tax code, or that lecture you gave me yesterday about the proper way to hold a teacup." Leora almost smiled, but she caught herself. They approached the primary security checkpoint that guarded the entrance to the data spine. 2 elite guards stood there, encased in ceremonial white armor that was far stronger than it looked. They held neural pikes, staffs tipped with crackling violet energy that could scramble a nervous system with a single touch. "Halt," the guard on the left said. His helmet faceplate was opaque. "State your business and authorization code." Ethan opened his mouth to give the rehearsed cover story, but the guard stepped forward, blocking his path with the pike. "Not you, laborer," the guard sneered. "Her." The guard loomed over Leora. "We have no scheduled maintenance for the Alpha Spine today. Remove your helmet." Ethan's hand drifted inches toward his hidden pistol. If she took off the helmet, they might recognize the diplomat's daughter, even with dirt on her face. Or worse, the scanners would pick up the high-cast frequency of her bioluminescence. Leora stiffened. Then, she shifted. It was a subtle physical transformation. Her shoulders dropped back, her chin lifted 2 inches, and the air around her seemed to drop 10 degrees in temperature. She did not remove the helmet. Instead, she stepped into the guard's personal space, radiating a wave of cold, imperious annoyance. "I do not have a schedule," she said, her voice dripping with aristocratic boredom. "I have a direct work order from Counselor Vane's private office regarding a cooling malfunction in the tertiary server array. If you would like to call him and explain why his personal data stream is overheating because you wanted to check my paperwork, be my guest." "I will wait. I am sure he will be delighted to be interrupted." The guard hesitated. The mention of Vane, the most feared name in the council, was a calculated risk. "She is good," Ethan whispered through the comms. "Now hit him with the entitlement." "Do you have any idea how difficult it is to find competent labor?" Leora continued, gesturing vaguely at Ethan as if he were a piece of luggage. "I have been dragging this technician through 3 sectors. I am tired. I am behind schedule, and I am not in the mood to be lectured by a doorstop in fancy armor." "Open the gate." The guard looked at his partner. The partner shrugged. No one wanted to be the reason Counselor Vane's servers melted. "Clear." The guard grunted, deactivating the energy field. "Move along." Leora swept past them without a thank you. Ethan followed, keeping his head down, clutching his toolbox. As they rounded the corner and entered the silent, refrigerated corridor of the data spine, Ethan let out a long breath. "Doorstop in fancy armor?" he whispered. That was ruthless. "It was necessary," Leora said, though her voice wavered slightly. "My father used to speak to them like that. came too easily. You used what you had, Ethan said. Nice work. They reached the access node for the central archive. It was a narrow catwalk suspended over a vast, cylindrical chasm. The walls of the chasm were lined with millions of crystalline data shards, glowing with a faint blue light. This was the memory of the civilization, or rather, the edited memory. As they walked along the catwalk, the air began to feel heavy. The hairs on Ethan's arms stood up. Leora stopped, gripping the railing. "Do you see them?" she whispered. Ethan looked around. "See what?" "The echoes," she said. She pointed into the empty air above the chasm. Ethan squinted. At first, he saw nothing. Then, he saw a flicker, a glitch in the visual field. It looked like a figure, a silvern woman holding a child, composed of static and mist. She appeared for a second, her mouth open in a silent scream, and then dissolved into pixels. Then another, a human man in a mining suit, fading in and out of the wall. "What the hell is that?" Ethan asked, his hand going to his pistol. "It is them," Leora said, her eyes wide and horrified. "The erased. The council deletes the files, but the neural network, it retains the imprint. They are not just data. Ethan, they are psychic residue. They are trapped in the machine." She moved toward a console interface set into the wall. "I have to access the directory. I have to find the path to the central core. Careful," Ethan warned. "Do not plug in too deep." Leora pulled a cable from her wrist computer and jacked into the port. Immediately, she gasped, her back arching. The blue light of the data shards flared red. "Leora!" Ethan shouted, inside Leora's mind. There was no catwalk. There was no Ethan. There was only a roaring ocean of voices. She was drowning in a flood of stolen lives. She felt the confusion of 1,000 people waking up in blank bodies. She felt the terror of mothers forgetting their children's faces. She felt the cold, clinical scalpel of the council excising love, anger, and art from the collective consciousness. "Join us," the voices whispered. "We are the lost. We are the silent." She felt her own identity beginning to fray, dissolving into the collective grief. It was seductive, to let go, to stop fighting, to become just another ghost in the machine. "Leora," a voice cut through the static. Not a ghost, a living, rough, urgent voice. "Come back to me." She felt a physical yank, the connection severed. She collapsed, gasping onto the cold metal grating of the catwalk. Ethan was kneeling over her, his hands gripping her shoulders, his face pale with fear. He had physically ripped the jack from her wrist. "Breathe," he commanded. "Look at me. Who are you?" I am Leora," she stammered, shaking violently. "Who am I?" he demanded. "You are Ethan," she whispered. "You are the technician who hates parties." Ethan let out a shaky laugh, pulling her into a sitting position. "Close enough." "I almost lost it," she said, clutching his arms. "There is so much pain in there. Ethan, it is infinite." "I know," he said. "But you are not part of the data. You are here, flesh and blood." He held her gaze, his brown eyes anchoring her drifting mind. "You are my anchor," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could check them. "In a universe built on forgetting, you are the only thing that feels real." Ethan froze. The intensity of the statement hung between them, heavier than the gravity. He reached up, his thumb brushing a smudge of grease from her cheek. "Then hold on tight," he said softly, "because the storm is just starting." He stood up, pulling her with him. "Which way to the core?" Leora checked her wrist computer, which was smoking slightly. "Down. 50 levels. The central archive is at the base of the spine. They descended. The gravity began to fluctuate as they went deeper. The Council kept the core in a zero-gravity envelope to preserve the delicate crystalline structures of the oldest memories. By the time they reached the blast doors of the central archive, they were pulling themselves along handholds, their feet floating inches off the floor. Ethan floated to the door control panel. He pulled out the biometric spoofer he had built, a messy nest of wires and stolen chips. "Ready?" he asked. Leora nodded, unholstering the small stun pistol the Resistance had given her. It felt light and toy-like in her hand. Ethan jammed the spoofer into the slot. The light on the door turned from red to amber, then green. The massive blast doors hissed open. They drifted inside. The central archive was a sphere of absolute darkness, dotted with floating constellations of data crystals. In the center, suspended in the void, was the master interface, a pulsating orb of pure light. "We made it," Ethan breathed. He kicked off the doorframe, propelling himself toward the orb. Leora followed, but as they drifted through the silent dark, a voice echoed around them. It did not come from a speaker. It came from everywhere. Anomaly detected. Ethan spun in midair, raising his weapon. Biological scan complete, the voice continued. It was smooth, synthetic, and utterly without mercy. Subject 1, Leora Vane. Status, compromised. Emotional variance, guilt, fear, betrayal. Subject 2, Ethan Thorne. Status, terrorist. Emotional variance, aggression, protectiveness, affection. Leora's blood ran cold. It can read our feelings. Correlation, illogical. The AI overseer stated, cross-species bonding is a violation of the purity protocols. Conclusion, contagion. Solution, sterilize. Lights flared on the perimeter of the sphere. Doors slammed open. Elite enforcers poured into the zero-gravity chamber. They wore jet-black void armor and carried magnetic propulsion packs. They did not speak. They simply opened fire. "Move!" Ethan shouted. He grabbed Leora's harness and fired his thruster pack, sending them spinning into the cover of a floating cluster of data crystals. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, shattering the crystals. Shards of holographic memory exploded outward like glitter, refracting the laser fire into a kaleidoscope of deadly light. Ethan returned fire, his pistol booming in the vacuum-sealed acoustics of the room. He took out an enforcer, the bolt punching through the black armor. The guard spun away, blood floating out in perfect red spheres. "Leora, the interface," Ethan yelled. "Get to the orb. I will hold them off. I cannot leave you," Leora cried, firing her stunner wildly at the approaching black shapes. "Go!" Leora kicked off a crystal shard, diving toward the glowing orb in the center. She could hear the battle raging behind her, the hiss of thrusters, the crack of plasma. She reached the master interface. Her fingers flew across the holographic keys. "Access denied," the AI intoned. "Emotional instability detected. Lockout engaged." "I am not unstable," Leora shouted at the machine. "I am angry." She tried to bypass the firewall, using the code she had stolen from her father's private server. Behind her, Ethan was fighting a losing battle. 3 enforcers were closing in on him, their neural lances glowing with vicious purple light. "Ethan!" she screamed. Ethan turned to check on her, and in that split second of distraction, an enforcer fired. The beam of the neural lance hit Ethan in the shoulder. He did not scream. His body convulsed, every muscle locking tight. He drifted backward, his weapon slipping from his paralyzed hand. "No!" Leora shrieked. The fear vanished. The guilt vanished. In their place, a white-hot supernova of rage exploded in her mind. She did not use the computer. She turned toward the enforcers. She reached out with her empathic senses not to feel them, but to break them. She grabbed the psychic residue of the room, the millions of screaming ghosts, the pain of the erased, and she channeled it. She became a lens, focusing all that agony into a single piercing beam. "Feel it," she screamed mentally. She slammed the psychic blast into the enforcers. The effect was instantaneous. The armored figures stopped. They dropped their weapons. They clawed at their helmets, screaming sounds that were muffled by their comms but visible in their thrashing limbs. They were experiencing 1,000 lifetimes of torture in a single second. They drifted aimlessly, their minds shattered. Leora gasped, the effort nearly causing her to black out. She kicked off the orb and flew to Ethan. He was floating near a cluster of shattered crystals, his breathing shallow. The neural lance had shut down his arm, but he was conscious. "Ethan," she sobbed, grabbing his harness. He looked at her, his eyes unfocused. Did you just brain melt a kill squad?" "I think so." She wept. "We have to hide. More are coming." She dragged him toward a small maintenance airlock set into the wall of the sphere. She punched the override, and the door slid open. She shoved him inside and sealed it behind them. Gravity re-engaged with a thud as the airlock pressurized. They collapsed onto the floor. Alarms were blaring outside, a rhythmic, deafening pulse. Ethan groaned, clutching his shoulder. His jumpsuit was torn, the skin underneath angry and red, webbing with purple veins from the neural toxins. Leora scrambled over to him, ripping a strip of fabric from her sleeve to bind the wound. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her hands glowing as she tried to use a basic soothing technique to block his pain. Ethan grimaced, sweat beading on his forehead. Told you this would be a bad date." "Shut up," Leora said, her voice shaking. "Shut up and let me save you." She pressed her hands to the wound. The bioluminescent markings on her face were flaring wildly, gold, violet, white, a visual storm of her terror. Ethan looked at her. He saw the tears tracking through the dirt on her face. He saw the fierce, terrifying love in her eyes. "Leora," he rasped, "if they get through that door." "They will not," she said fiercely. "We are trapped," he said. "You know we are." "I do not care," she cried. She looked down at him, and the reality of his mortality hit her like a physical blow. He was human. He was fragile. He was bleeding for her. She leaned down, her face inches from his. "I am not letting you go," she whispered. She kissed him. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss like the one in the observation dome. This was desperate. It was the taste of salt and copper. It was a claiming. She pressed herself against him, heedless of the blood, heedless of the alarm screaming intruder alert. Ethan's good hand came up to grip the back of her neck, pulling her deeper. For a moment, the boundaries between them dissolved. There was no human, no Sylvan, just two terrifyingly small sparks of life clinging to each other in the dark. The heat of it was consuming. It was a promise of everything they could have if they survived. A life without fear, a love without laws. Crunch. The blast door buckled inward. Metal screeched as a plasma cutter began to slice through the lock. They broke apart, gasping, their foreheads resting against each other. "Not enough time," Ethan whispered, his voice full of regret. Leora looked at the door. The glowing tip of the plasma cutter was carving a circle in the steel. She looked at her wrist computer. "We cannot hold the vault, and I cannot access the main broadcast array from here. The AI has locked me out." "Then we leave," Ethan said, trying to stand. "We fight our way out." "No," Leora said, her mind racing. "If we leave now, the Sector 4 erasure happens. Those people die." She looked at the data port on the airlock wall. It was a local node, not powerful enough to broadcast to the whole ring world, but linked to the underlevel subsystem. I can't stop the erase, she said, her voice hardening. But I can save the evidence. I can set a timed pulse. I will copy the erase logs, all of them, and bury them in the hidden nodes of the underlevels. The resistance can retrieve them later. Ethan nodded. Do it. Leora plugged in. Her fingers flew, copying files. Encrypting. Distribution timer set. 5 minutes. Done, she said, pulling the jack. Now we run. She grabbed Ethan's good arm and hauled him up. They moved to the rear exit of the airlock, which led into the narrow service tunnels behind the archive. They sprinted or stumbled down the narrow corridor. Ethan was limping heavily, leaning on Leora. Warning, the AI's voice boomed through the speakers. Containment breach in service tunnel beta. Venting atmosphere in 30 seconds. Leora stopped. Venting? They are blowing the airlock, Ethan said, his face grim. They are going to suck us out into space. He looked ahead. 10 meters away. There was a single emergency maintenance pod docked in the wall. It was a small, egg-shaped capsule meant for hull repairs. There, he pointed. They scrambled toward it. Venting in 10 seconds, the AI counted down. 9. 8. They reached the pod. It was tiny, barely enough room for one person in a pressure suit, let alone 2 without gear. Ethan looked at the pod. Then he looked at Leora. Get in, he said. We can both fit, Leora argued, trying to squeeze inside. Ethan shook his head. The life support won't handle 2. And the launch mechanism is manual. Someone has to pull the lever from the outside. Leora froze. No. 5. 4. Ethan grabbed her. He did not kiss her this time. He shoved her. He pushed her hard into the pod, slamming her back against the padded seat. No! Ethan! Leora screamed, lunging forward. Ethan hit the control panel. The glass canopy slammed down, sealing her inside. Leora pounded on the glass. Her sound was cut off, but he could see her mouth forming the word, no. She was screaming, her hands glowing violently against the transparent shield. Ethan looked at her. He placed his bloody hand against the glass for a fleeting second. He smiled. It was a sad, crooked smile that lit up his scars. Save the memory, he mouthed. 2. 1. Ethan grabbed the manual release lever on the wall and yanked it down with all his remaining strength. Explosive bolts fired. The pod shot away from the station, rocketing out into the void. At the same instant, the service tunnel airlocks blew open. The air rushed out in a violent, silent roar. Leora, spun away in the safety of the pod, looked back. Through the spinning window, she saw the corridor decompress. She saw the debris flying out into the star-strewn blackness. And she saw Ethan. He did not fly out. He had wrapped his arm around a support stanchion, holding on against the hurricane of escaping air. But as the pod tumbled away, shrinking him to a speck, she saw the squad of enforcers in magnetic boots rounding the corner, their weapons trained on the lone, battered human who had stayed behind. Then, the pod's thrusters kicked in, and the stars blurred into streaks of light, carrying her away from the only person who had ever made her feel real. The escape pod did not land. It died. It screamed through the lower atmosphere of the industrial sector, shearing through a scaffold of rusted cooling pipes before slamming into a mountain of refuse. The impact was a bone-jarring crunch of metal and composite that threw Leora against the restraints with enough force to knock the breath from her lungs. Silence followed. It was heavy and absolute, broken only by the hiss of a ruptured coolant line and the groaning of settling debris. Leora unbuckled the harness with shaking hands. The canopy had shattered on impact. She climbed out, her boots sinking into a slurry of industrial waste and gray ash. The air here tasted of sulfur and abandonment. She was in the dead zones, the forgotten manufacturing belt that encircled the ring world's equator. She stood alone under the flickering light of a malfunctioning street lamp, her chest heaving. She touched the empty space at her side where Ethan should have been. The memory of his face behind the glass, the sad, crooked smile, the way he had mouthed, "Save the memory," hit her harder than the crash. A small device on her wrist beeped. It was the resistance transponder. A text readout scrolled across the cracked screen. Signal received. Rendezvous point Alpha. Await extraction. Leora stared at the message. The logical choice was to go. To take the data she had saved, the evidence that could bring down the Council, and run to the safety of the asteroid base. It was what Ethan had sacrificed himself for. She ripped the transponder from her wrist and threw it into the darkness. She was not going back. Not without him. The Council had taken everything from her, her innocence, her family name, her belief in the world. They were not taking him. Grief, cold and sharp as a knife, began to harden into something else. It fueled a rage that burned brighter than her bioluminescence. She wrapped her torn, grease-stained jumpsuit tighter around her frame and began to walk toward the distant, sickly glow of the inhabited sectors. Ethan Thorne was not dead, though there were moments in the last 6 hours when he wished he was. He hung suspended in a field of anti-gravity restraints in the center of a pristine, white chamber. The room was circular, lined with mirrors that reflected his own battered body back at him from every angle. His shoulder, where the neural lance had hit him, was a mass of agony. But that was background noise compared to what they were doing to his mind. A probe, a slender needle of chrome, hovered inches from his forehead. It emitted a low, throbbing hum that resonated in his teeth. Counselor Vane stood behind the control console, safely behind a wall of glass. His voice was piped in, smooth and unbothered. "Let us try again. Mr. Thorne, where is the girl?" Ethan lifted his head. His lip was split and blood trickled down his chin. "She is having dinner with your mother," Ethan rasped. He forced a grin, though it felt like his face was cracking. "Lovely woman, terrible cook," Vane sighed. The sound was amplified, filling the room. "Stimulate the amygdala." Vane ordered the technician. "Level 4. The probe flashed. Ethan did not scream this time. He had no breath left for it. His back arched, every muscle snapping tight as a wave of pure, distilled terror was injected directly into his brain. He saw his old squad dying. He saw Leora's face melting. He felt the cold vacuum of space tearing him apart. It lasted for 10 seconds. It felt like 10 years. When the beam cut off, Ethan slumped in the gravity field, gasping, sweat pooling in the air around him. "We know she accessed the local node," Vane said, his voice bored. "We know she initiated a data dump. Where did she send the files? Who are her contacts?" Ethan spat a glob of blood at the mirror. "I forgot," he wheezed. "I have a terrible memory. Maybe you should check the logs." "Oh, wait. We deleted them." Vane turned away from the glass. "Prepare the broadcast," he told his aide. "If he will not speak to us, perhaps he will speak to the public." Deepfake protocols engaged. Overlay his voice patterns. Make him sound fanatical. The Black Lotus was a dive bar wedged into the foundation of a transit pillar in Sector 7. It was a place where light went to die, obscured by clouds of narcotic vapor and the shadows of illegal deals. Leora sat in a corner booth, her hood pulled low. She had traded a diamond earring, one of the few remnants of her former life, for a bowl of synthetic protein and a seat near the news feed. The holographic screen above the bar flickered. The music stopped. The chatter of the patrons died down as the High Council seal rotated in gold light. Breaking news, the announcer said. The terrorist threat has been neutralized. Ethan Thorne, a human extremist and leader of the violent separatist group The Broken Chain, has been captured. Leora's heart hammered against her ribs. She looked up, her eyes locking onto the screen. Footage played. It was Ethan. He was sitting in a chair, looking clean, his wounds bandaged, his expression calm. Too calm. I admit to my crimes, the digital Ethan said. His voice was perfect, but the cadence was wrong. It lacked his rough edges, his sardonic rhythm. I kidnapped Lady Leora to use as a bargaining chip. I forced her to sabotage the archive. The data released is a fabrication, designed to sow chaos. The council is innocent. I acted alone. A murmur went through the bar. Human trash, a Silveran patron muttered, always trying to break what they cannot build. Leora gripped the edge of the table. She saw what they did not. She saw the slight glaze in his eyes, the subtle stutter in the video rendering around his jawline. It was a lie, a digital puppet show, but he was alive. She stood up, ignoring the glare of the bartender. She needed help, but the resistance was too slow, too cautious. She needed people who understood the architecture of memory. She moved to the back of the bar, where a group of cybernetically enhanced individuals were playing a game of chance with glowing tiles. I am looking for the Echo Walkers, Leora said, her voice low but steady. One of the players, a woman with silver skin and ocular implants, looked up. That is a dangerous name to say out loud. Girl, the woman said. Who is asking? Someone with a head full of secrets, Leora replied, and the codes to unlock them. The Echo Walkers were not freedom fighters, they were hoarders. They lived in a subterranean bunker beneath the city's waste processing plant, surrounded by stacks of stolen hard drives and ancient servers. They traded in memories, illegal nostalgia, forbidden history, the things the council tried to erase. Leora stood before their leader, a wizened, hunchbacked creature named Moros who floated in a suspension chair. You say you triggered the pulse? Moros asked, his voice wheezing through a respirator. I did, Leora said, and I need you to decrypt what I sent. Moros gestured to a massive screen on the wall. We caught fragments. The council's firewall scrambled most of it, but we pulled a few threads. He typed a command. The screen lit up with jagged lines of code and grainy video files. This file, Moros said, pointing a trembling finger. It was tagged with a specific biometric marker, yours. But it links to a deleted colonial record. Open it, Leora commanded. The video played. It was shaky cam footage, time-stamped 10 years ago. It showed a dusty, red-soiled planet, a colony of prefab habitats, children playing in the dirt, and soldiers, human soldiers in council uniforms. Leora leaned in. She recognized the unit insignia. It was the same patch she had seen on Ethan's old jacket. The footage jumped. Nighttime. Fire. The soldiers were rounding up the colonists, not for transport, but for processing. The neural trucks were waiting. A young soldier, his face 10 years younger but unmistakably Ethan, was shouting at his commanding officer. He was waving a data pad, screaming about orders, about illegality. The officer struck him. Ethan went down. 2 other soldiers held him back, forcing him to watch as the colonists, his friends, the people he had been protecting, were marched into the trucks. Erasure complete, the file stamp read. Colony designation Oakhaven, status liquidated. Leora covered her mouth. He didn't just see it. She whispered, He lived it. Moros scrolled down. The council wiped the colony to cover up a mining accident that poisoned the water table. He explained, they erased the victims to avoid paying reparations. And then they erased the memories of the soldiers who witnessed it. Leora stared at the frozen image of young Ethan, his face twisted in a scream of helpless rage. This was the ghost he carried. This was the sorrow she had felt when she touched his scar. The council hadn't just taken his history. They had taken his ability to process the trauma. They had left him with the pain but stolen the context, leaving him to think he was just a broken soldier with nightmares he couldn't explain. Pain is a map, she realized, the thought crystallizing in her mind. It tells us where we have been. It tells us what matters. To take it away is to leave us lost. She looked at Moros. I am going to get him back, she said. And I am never letting anyone touch my mind again. The High Council spire was a fortress, but every fortress had a service entrance, or, in this case, a diplomatic back door. Leora did not sneak in. She walked in. She had cleaned herself up, stolen a cloak from the smugglers, and used her old biometric clearance, which the council, in their arrogance, had merely flagged rather than deleted, to request an emergency audience with Councillor Harith. Harith was the oldest member of the council, a Sylvan who had known Leora since she was a child. He was weak, she knew. He valued comfort over cruelty, which made him pliable. She found him in his private garden, pruning a tree of glass leaves. Leora, Harith gasped, dropping his shears. You are alive. The guards. I must call the guards. Do not, Leora said, stepping from the shadows. Her voice was not the polite chime of a debutante. It was the command of a survivor. You are a traitor, Harith stammered, backing away. You conspired with the human. I conspired with the truth. Harith, she said, advancing on him. I saw Oakhaven. I saw what you did to the mining colonies. Harith paled. That was necessary. Stability. Stability is a lie you tell yourself so you can sleep, Leora shouted, her bioluminescence flaring a blinding white. You are not erasing dissent. You are erasing your own sins. She stopped inches from him. She reached out and grabbed his hand. She did not ask permission. She forced a connection. She showed him. She pushed the image of the screaming colonists, the face of the tortured Ethan, the terror of the pit directly into his mind. Harith fell to his knees, gasping, clutching his chest. Stop, he begged. It is too much. It is what you built, Leora hissed. Now, give me the access codes to the detention wing, or I will broadcast this feeling to every servant, every guard, and every aide in this building. I will make you live in this nightmare forever. Harith wept. He was a creature of comfort, and the raw agony of the erased was more than he could bear. Beta 90. He sobbed. The code is Beta 90, the service elevator in the East Wing. Thank you, Counselor, Leora said, releasing him. She looked down at him with cold pity. Pray that when the world changes, they are more merciful to you than you were to them. The preparation was brief. Leora stood in the maintenance shaft of the spire, surrounded by a small strike team. 3 Echo Walkers and 2 resistance fighters she had managed to contact on the encrypted frequency. She held a small audio recorder in her hand. She needed to say it. If she died in the next hour, she needed him to know. She pressed the button. Ethan, she began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands. If you are hearing this, it means I did not make it to the exit, but you did. Listen to me. Do not let them take this away. Do not let them make you forget. She paused, looking up at the metal grating above. I know it hurts. I know you want to close your eyes and let it go, but you are forbidden. That is a direct order from nobility, so you have to obey. A small, sad laugh escaped her. You are my anchor, Ethan, and I am yours. If I am gone, you have to remember me, even the bad parts, even the fear, because that memory is the only place I will still exist. I love you. Now, wake up. She slipped the recorder into her pocket. Move out, she whispered. The detention wing was a labyrinth of silence. The strike team moved like shadows. Leora took point. She did not need motion trackers. She could feel the guards. Two ahead, bored, distracted. She signaled to the echo walkers. They fired silent, distinct pulses from their suppression rifles. The guards slumped over without a sound. Camera grid ahead. Leora closed her eyes, reaching out to the technician monitoring the feeds 3 floors up. She pushed a wave of drowsiness and routine into his mind. He blinked, yawned, and looked away from the monitors for the 10 seconds they needed to cross the hall. They reached the door to cell block 1. Leora punched in Harith's code, Beta 90. The light turned green. Leora burst through the door. The scene before her stopped her heart. Ethan was strapped to the chair. The machine was active. A massive rotating ring of lights descended over his head, humming with a frequency that made Leora's teeth ache. Vane was not there, but 3 technicians were monitoring the output. Initiating final wipe, a technician said. Subject is near collapse. Ethan's eyes were open, but they were rolling back. He was fading. Ethan! Leora screamed. The technicians spun around, reaching for their alarms. The resistance fighters opened fire with stun rounds, dropping 2 of them instantly. Leora sprinted toward the chair. The 3rd technician, a large silvern male, blocked her path, pulling a shock baton. Get back, he shouted. The protocol cannot be interrupted. Leora did not stop. She did not dodge. She ran straight at him. You want memories? She cried. Take them. She lunged, grabbing his face with both hands. She unloaded everything. The crash of the pod, the smell of the burning colony, the grief of the empty seat, the rage of the bar. The technician shrieked, dropping the baton and clutching his head as his mind collapsed under the weight of her raw, unfiltered emotion. Leora vaulted over his falling body and reached the control console. The erasure progress bar was at 90%. She tried to cancel it. Locked. She tried to cut the power. Backup generators online. She looked at Ethan. He was convulsing, he was slipping away. She realized she couldn't stop the machine, and she had to break it. And she couldn't break it with code. She had to break it with the one thing the system couldn't process. The truth. She grabbed the neural interface cable, the input line feeding into Ethan's helmet. She jammed the connector into the port at the base of her own neck. Leora, no! One of the echo walkers shouted. Leora didn't listen. She opened the floodgates. She didn't just use her own memories. She tapped into the echo walkers' drives, the stolen histories, the millions of deleted lives. She became a conduit. She pushed the collective screaming memory of the entire ring world into the erasure grid. Overload. The system warned. Data capacity exceeded. Emotional variance fatal. The machine whined, a high-pitched scream of dying electronics. The rotating ring above Ethan stuttered. Sparks showered down. Error, error, truth detected. With a deafening crack, the console exploded. The lights in the room blew out, plunging them into darkness illuminated only by the sparking machinery and Leora's blindingly bright skin. The restraints on the chair clicked open as the fail-safes triggered. Ethan slumped forward, falling out of the chair. Leora ripped the cable from her neck, gasping for air, and caught him. They collapsed onto the floor together. Ethan? She whispered. shaking him. "Ethan, look at me." Ethan groaned. He coughed, his body shuddering. He opened his eyes. They were hazy, bloodshot, and confused. He looked at the ceiling, then at the smoke, and finally, at the glowing face hovering inches from his. "Leora?" he croaked. His voice was a ruin. "I am here," she said, tears streaming down her face. He reached up, his hand trembling violently, and touched her cheek. He traced the line of her jaw, as if checking she was real. They tried to erase you," he whispered, the words slurring. "But you came back." Leora pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of antiseptic and sweat and life. "They tried to erase me," she sobbed, echoing the words that had started it all. "Until a human saved my life." She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes, fierce and unyielding. "I am returning the favor." Ethan let out a breath that was half laugh, half sob. He wrapped his arms around her, gripping her with a desperation that cracked her ribs. "Good return," he whispered into her hair. They held each other on the cold floor of the torture chamber, shaking as the alarms began to wail in the distance, two broken things that had refused to be fixed, fused together by the fire. The corridor leading to the central broadcast hub was a throat of glass and steel, vibrating with the cacophony of a dying regime. Red strobes slashed through the smoke, and the air smelled of ozone and scorched ozone. Ethan moved with a limp, his arm thrown over Leora's shoulder for support, his free hand gripping a stolen plasma pistol. He was pale, the aftershocks of the neural lance still trembling in his muscles. But his eyes were sharp. Beside him, Leora was a beacon. Her bioluminescence was no longer the polite, controlled azure of the court. It was a blinding, furious white, pulsing in rhythm with the adrenaline flooding her system. They were not alone. As they stumbled toward the heavy blast doors of the hub, the very air around them seemed to glitch. The council's pristine holographic ads, which usually displayed smiling faces and slogans about harmony, were fracturing. "Look," Leora whispered, pointing at the wall. The digital architecture was bleeding. Ghostly figures formed from static and corrupted data were clawing their way out of the panels. A Silvern woman made of blue pixels reached out from a wall screen, her mouth open in a silent roar. A human child, rendered in grain and noise, pushed against a locking mechanism. The echoes. Ethan breathed, watching a spectral hand merge with a control panel. "They are helping us. They are waking up," Leora said. "I overloaded the grid. The deleted files are not just data anymore. They are angry." Ahead of them, a squad of council enforcers rounded the corner, weapons raised. "Halt!" the lead officer shouted. Before they could fire, the holographic statues lining the hall flickered violently. The ghost echoes surged from the projectors, swarming the enforcers like a swarm of digital bees. The soldiers flailed, their targeting systems blinded by the sudden influx of phantom data. "Go!" Ethan yelled. He fired 2 shots, suppressing the confused guards, and dragged Leora past them. The door to the hub was locked, a massive slab of Imperium steel coated to the DNA of the High Council. Ethan jammed his bypass tool into the port, but the light remained red. "It is deadlocked," he cursed. "The AI has isolated the node." Leora stepped forward. She placed her hand on the cold metal. She did not use a code. She reached out with her mind, finding the psychic residue of the technicians who had built the door, the guards who stood watch, the thousands of erased souls whose data streamed through the cables in the walls. "Open," she commanded, not with voice, but with will. The ghosts in the system obeyed. On the control panel, the red light fought against a sudden surge of white static. The digital specters pushed against the code, overwhelmed the logic gates with raw, chaotic emotion. With a groan of protesting gears, the blast doors split and slid open. The central broadcast hub was a cavernous auditorium, a tiered coliseum of information where the council shaped the reality of the ring world. In the center, a raised dais held the primary interface, surrounded by a waterfall of holographic screens that reached the ceiling. It was occupied. Standing on the dais, flanked by a dozen elite Praetorian guards, was High Counselor Vane. He looked down at them, his elongated face twisted in a sneer of absolute disgust. "You are persistent," Vane said, his voice amplified by the room's acoustics. "I will give you that, but this ends here. The narrative belongs to us." Ethan raised his pistol, but he was shaking. There were too many of them. Leora stepped away from him, walking into the open. "The narrative is a lie." "Vane," she said, her voice ringing clear without a microphone, "and we brought the edits." She held up the drive, the crystal storage unit containing the reassembled logs, the screams of the colonies, the truth of Oakhaven. Vane laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. "Do you think the people care about truth? They care about breakfast. They care about safety. We give them that. We take away the pain of history so they can work in peace." "You take away their souls," Leora shouted. Vane gestured to his guards. "Kill the human. Secure the girl. We will wipe her mind until she does not even remember how to weep." The guards stepped forward. Ethan shoved Leora behind a console just as the air filled with plasma fire. "Plug it in," Ethan roared, popping up to fire a frantic suppression volley. "I will hold them." It was a lie, and they both knew it. He had one pistol against 12 heavy repeaters, but he stood his ground, using the console as a shield, his movements fueled by the desperate need to buy her seconds. Leora scrambled to the interface port. The air sizzled above her head. She jammed the crystal drive into the slot. Upload initiated. The system chimed. Verification required. "I am the verification," Leora screamed, slamming her hand onto the biometric scanner. "Access denied. User flagged as traitor." The AI overseer's voice boomed through the chamber. "Security Protocol Omega active. Purging foreign data." Leora watched in horror as a progress bar appeared, not for the upload, but for the deletion of her drive. The AI was eating the evidence. She closed her eyes. She could not outcode a supercomputer gun, but she could outfeel it. She dropped her mental shields, all of them. She reached out, not to the machine, but to Vane. The High Counselor stood on the dais, his mind a fortress of cold logic and suppressed memory. He was the anchor of the system. Leora hit him with a psychic battering ram. She did not send anger. She sent Oakhaven. She forced him to stand in the red dust of the mining colony. She forced him to feel the heat of the fire. She forced him to feel the terror of the mother whose child was ripped from her arms, a terror Leora had absorbed from the ghosts in the archive. Vane staggered, clutching his head. "No!" he shouted. "This is unauthorized! Look at it!" Leora screamed, her mind intertwining with his. "Look at what you bought your stability with." Vane fell to his knees. The Praetorian guards hesitated, seeing their leader crumble. In that moment of hesitation, the doors at the top of the auditorium burst open. "For the resistance," a deep voice bellowed. Vorian, the massive alien mercenary, charged in, wielding a rotary cannon. Behind him streamed a chaotic army of smugglers, echo walkers, and defecting soldiers. They had broken through the perimeter. The room erupted into total war. Plasma fire crossed in the air like lethal fireworks. Ethan, seeing the distraction, vaulted over the console. He didn't run for cover. He ran for the central pillar. "Leora, the AI," he shouted. "It is blocking the signal." Leora was locked in a psychic duel with Vane. The counselor was fighting back now, lashing out with tendrils of icy, suffocating mental pressure. "You are weak." Vane's voice hissed in her mind. "Emotion is a flaw. Emotion is the fuel." Leora countered. She pushed harder, pouring every ounce of her grief, her love for Ethan, her rage at the injustice, into Vane's mind. It was too much for a psyche built on repression. Vane screamed, a sound that tore his throat and collapsed into a catatonic heap on the floor. The connection broke. Leora gasped, falling against the interface. "Warning." The AI boomed. "Civil unrest detected. Initiating global calm protocol." Ethan froze. He was halfway up the maintenance ladder to the central processor. "What is that?" he yelled. "It is a sedative wave," Leora cried, reading the scrolling text. "It will broadcast a psionic dampening field across the entire ring world. It will put everyone into a trance. They will not care about the evidence." Ethan reached the top of the pillar. He ripped open the maintenance panel of the signal generator. "It is modulation," he shouted, staring at the complex wiring. "It works by suppressing the limbic system frequency. Can you stop it?" "No," Ethan yelled, pulling a multi-tool from his belt. "But I can invert it." He didn't cut the wires. He crossed them. He jammed his tool into the frequency regulator, twisting the dial past the safety limit, turning the suppression wave into an amplification spike. "Do not calm them down." Ethan gritted out, sparks raining onto his face. "Wake them up." He slammed the panel shut and hit the manual engage. "Protocol modified," the AI announced, sounding confused, broadcasting emotional resonance. The hum of the transmitter changed pitch. It went from a soothing lullaby to a high, vibrating scream of pure energy. At the console, the deletion bar stopped. The ghost echoes in the system, emboldened by the surge of emotion, overran the AI's defenses. "Upload complete" on the massive screens above the dais, and on every screen across the million-mile span of the ring world. The image changed. The council logo vanished. In its place appeared the face of a young soldier screaming as a village burned, then a mother weeping in a detention chair. Then the map of the erased sectors. The audio feed cut in. It was not a polished speech. It was the raw, unedited screams of the victims, layered with the cold, clinical narration of the counselors ordering their destruction. Leora looked up at the screens. It was done. The truth was out. Below her, Vane lay broken. The guards had thrown down their weapons, staring at the screens in horror, seeing their own atrocities reflected back at them. But the AI was not done. "Critical system failure," the voice said. "Central hub compromised. Initiating Scorch protocol. Self-destruct in 10 seconds. Leora's blood ran cold. She looked at Ethan. He was still atop the pillar, 30 feet in the air. "Ethan, the hub is rigged." Ethan looked at the countdown flashing on the wall. 9. 8. He jumped. He hit the dais hard, rolling to absorb the impact, and scrambled to Leora. "We cannot make the door," he said, his voice strangely calm. The resistance fighters were fleeing, shouting for everyone to evacuate. Vorian roared at them from the exit, but the distance was too great. 5, 4, there was nowhere to go. The blast shutters had slammed down over the exits to contain the explosion. Leora looked at Ethan. He was bruised, bleeding, covered in grease and soot. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "It is okay," she whispered, grabbing his hands. Ethan pulled her close. He did not look at the flashing lights. He looked only at her. "We won," he said. "They know. 3, 2. Leora buried her hands in his hair, pulling his face down to hers. "I am not afraid," she said, and she wasn't. For the first time in her life, her mind was quiet. No ghosts, no static, just him. Ethan kissed her. It was not a movie kiss. It was messy and desperate and full of salt and tears. It was a collision of two souls who had found each other in the dark and refused to let go. In that embrace, they poured everything unsaid, the years of loneliness, the sudden blinding joy of connection, the tragedy of bad timing, into a single shared breath. One, the world went white. The explosion ripped the roof off the central hub, fireballed upward into the violet sky, a signal flare visible for 1,000 miles. But the dais held. The containment field Ethan had reversed. The one meant to amplify emotion had created a feedback loop with Leora's own bioluminescent energy. When the blast hit, she had instinctively thrown up a shield, not just of telepathy, but of pure, crystallized will. She woke to the sound of coughing. The air was thick with gray dust. The screens were shattered. The beautiful glass walls were gone. Leora pushed a piece of debris off her legs. She was aching in places she didn't know she had, but she was whole. "Ethan," she croaked. A hand reached out from the rubble beside her. "Still, here," a rasping voice replied. Ethan sat up. He looked like a statue made of ash. He blinked, clearing his eyes, and looked at her. "Did we die?" he asked. Leora reached out and touched his face, her fingers leaving clean trails in the soot. "I do not think so," she said, a sob breaking in her throat. The afterlife would not smell this much like burnt wiring. Ethan let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. He looked around. The blast doors were twisted open, and through the smoke, shapes were moving. Vorian emerged, looking battered but triumphant. He saw them and stopped. By the void, the giant alien rumbled. "You two are harder to kill than cockroaches." Ethan leaned back against the ruined console, pulling Leora against his side. "It is the spite," he murmured. "Keeps us going." Leora rested her head on his shoulder, watching as the smoke cleared above them. Through the hole in the roof, she could see the sky. It was no longer dominated by the orderly traffic of the council. Ships were breaking formation. Patrol drones were spinning aimlessly. And on the horizon, the lights of the sectors were blinking, not in panic, but in code. Freedom, freedom, freedom. The weeks that followed were a blur of organized chaos. The High Council did not fall gracefully. It shattered. The broadcast had broken the trance. When the citizens felt the pain of the erased, amplified by Ethan's modification, they rose up as one. The enforcers, overwhelmed by the sudden return of their own suppressed empathy, laid down their arms. A provisional council was formed. It was a messy, loud, argumentative body composed of Silveran nobles, human technicians, and alien laborers. Leora stood before the Great Assembly, a vast outdoor gathering in the central plaza of Sector 1. She wore simple clothes, a tunic and trousers of gray synthweave. She wore no jewelry. Her markings glowed with a steady, calm light. She looked out at the sea of faces, millions of them. "I am not here to ask for your forgiveness." She spoke into the microphone. "I am a daughter of the house that tried to silence you. My name is written on the orders that destroyed your homes." A silence hung over the crowd. "But I am also a witness." She continued. "I saw what no one should see, and I learned that there is no peace in silence. Peace is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of truth." She looked to the side of the stage and where Ethan stood. He was leaning against a pillar, wearing a new jacket, his arms crossed. He nodded to her. "We have a choice now," Leora said, her voice rising. "We can try to forget the horror. We can try to build a new lie to make ourselves feel better. Or we can remember. We can keep the scars." Because scars are proof that we survived. Scars are the map that shows us where we have been. So we never go back there again. The cheer that rose from the crowd was not the polite applause of the old days. It was a roar. It was a sound of release. Ethan watched her, a pride swelling in his chest that felt dangerously like hope. Later that evening, the celebration spilled into the streets. But Leora and Ethan sought the quiet. They stood on a balcony of the newly christened Remembrance Spire, formerly the Council Tower. The air was clear, the smog filters finally working at full capacity thanks to Ethan's redesign. Leora leaned against the railing, looking down at the city. It was brighter now. The rigid separation of the tiers had dissolved. Sky trains moved freely between the upper and lower levels. "It is loud," Leora noted. "It is alive," Ethan corrected. He stood beside her, holding 2 glasses of actual non-synthetic wine he had scrounged from Vane's private cellar. He handed her one. "To the second date," he said, clinking his glass against hers. Leora smiled, taking a sip. It was much better than the first. Fewer explosions. Ethan turned to lean his back against the railing, watching her. "You were good today. The speech. You sounded like a leader." "I am not a leader," she said, shaking her head. "I am just a memory keeper. You are the builder. Vorian tells me the new archive system is online." Ethan nodded. "No more deletions. Every log, every record, every birth and death is written to a blockchain that cannot be edited. History is permanent now. The good and the ugly." Leora looked at him. Her eyes drifted to the scar on his eyebrow, then down to the new bandage on his arm. "And us?" she asked softly. "Are we permanent?" Ethan set his glass down on the railing. He stepped closer to her. "I told you," he said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that always made her shiver. "I am your anchor. Anchors do not move." He reached out and took her hand. His fingers were rough. Hers were smooth and glowing. The contrast was stark, but the fit was perfect. Leora squeezed his hand. "They tried to erase me," she whispered, looking out at the stars. Ethan followed her gaze. Thousands of ships were launching from the docks. They were not warships. They were colony vessels, filled with mixed crews, Sylvan, human Krell, heading out to the clean worlds the Council had hoarded. They were going to build something new. "They tried," Ethan said. Leora looked back at him. Her bioluminescence flared a soft, warm gold, the color of contentment. "Until a human saved my life," she finished. Ethan smiled, the expression reaching his eyes, erasing the shadows of the war that had lived there for so long. "And you saved mine," he said. He leaned in, and this time, there was no desperation. There was no fear of death. There was only the slow, deliberate gravity of choice. When they kissed, it was not an ending. It was a seal on a document that could never be rewritten. High above them, the dying star of Ethelgard flared with a final violet pulse before settling into a stable, engineered burn. It was no longer a threat. It was just a sun, shining on a world that had finally learned to look at itself in the mirror without flinching. Leora rested her head on Ethan's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, and watched the ship sail into the dark, carrying the memory of the past as a compass for the future.